And we are live. So, hi everybody. Welcome to this episode of Dracaena Wines on Wine. And I am beyond ecstatic tonight because in my opinion, we've got like a maverick here tonight. We've got somebody that, in terms of winemaking, that I look up to, that I think is outrageous, and the wines blow my mind. I mean, the Riesling is the wine that, I I might possibly kill somebody for this Riesling. Um, it is so good. But anyway, without any further ado, I am very honored and very proud to introduce Stu Smith from Smith-Madrone. So, hi, Stu.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
How are you doing tonight?
Fine. Fine.
You're cold, right?
Well, it's all relative. I left the winery a little less than an hour ago doing this from home. And it was like 39. So while it may be cold for us, you put it in perspective in like, what was it? Duluth and Ely and International Falls were like minus 29. I think International Falls at like minus 44.
Yeah.
And that's an 80-degree swing.
Yeah, it is insane. So I am currently on the wrong coast. I am here in New Jersey, and last week, not even last week, 4 days ago, we were -1 and then the wind chill was like -16.
Right.
And it was so cold. And today I was out like this, no jacket, whatever, because it was 61 degrees out today.
Oh, so, well, you're doing well.
Yeah.
We had snow overnight.
Yeah, I saw the social media pictures of it. That's crazy. So
is it not that unusual?
Really?
I think I was talking with my brother today about it, and we both think it was 73, where we had 2 feet of snow on the mountain.
Oh, wow. But that was 73. That was, that's not, so snow is not really a common thing, right? It kind of flurries?
Well, not that much, but we get an inch or 3 every 2 or 3 years.
Oh, all right. That's more than what I thought you actually got. But you're up high. So what about down lower? Are they getting?
I can remember. No, there's no snow down here.
Okay.
But I can remember at least 2 times where there's been snow in the valley.
Oh, okay.
And my brother was going to school at Berkeley in the early 60s. I went in the mid 60s. And I think it snowed in San Francisco in the early 60s. But we'll see. It hadn't snowed in the city, San Francisco being the city.
Right.
Hasn't snowed in the city for a long time. But St. Helena, the valley, I can remember two good times where we got 2, 3, 4 inches. Substantial. The smash repair places were very happy because there were lots of cars going in to get repaired. So
nobody knows how to drive out there for when that happens, right?
Nobody does. And then the young I used to say young males, and now it's the young males and the young females are just like nuts. They've joined the crazies, and it's a different world, but it is what it is. Mostly we'll all survive them.
Well, yeah. Well, I can't wait for the day that I am permanently, out in Paso, where I'm not really getting any more snow. I'm done with snow. Once I get one snow a season, and I'm done with it. After the first snowfall, where I'm like, oh, look at how pretty, then I'm done with it. I don't want it anymore.
Well, I will say we all ate outside at a table, and it was a spectacular, clean, crisp, fun day to be on the mountain.
Did you have a heater? I wouldn't be sitting outside. Nope.
I mean, look, we don't stay out there. If we get cold, we go inside.
Yeah.
The sun was out, and there's something with a fresh snowfall. It just cleans the air. It's like it's scrubbed.
Yeah. I know what you mean. There is a certain scent, certain like feeling when that snow is falling. It really is.
Very cool. But anyway,
Yeah, but we are here not to talk about snow. We are here to talk about Smith-Madrone and wine and your amazing history. I'm going to start off right, like kind of from the beginning. So Smith-Madrone actually was founded in like 1971, correct?
71. Yeah.
So you have been producing wines. Like, first off, what do you think are like some major changes or the biggest changes you've seen from when you started the winery to today? Like what are the changes in the wine industry? What are the changes in you in your wine?
Well, one, there are many changes, both viticulturally and winemaking, and then just in the valley itself. From the vineyard side of things, it's a dramatic change. In 1971, when we planted the vineyard, the valley was using 6-foot wooden stakes. They planted on a 12-by-8 spacing. They had 2 wires. They had a fruiting wire and a catch wire. And a lot of people would use split stakes. And money was really, really, really important back then because nobody had a lot of it. So there was a lot of sweat equity that went into vineyards and a lot of time. And all of that has changed really dramatically. We now, for instance, at Smith-Madrone, our first planting was 12 by 6 feet wide. Pardon me, the rows were 12 foot wide and 6 feet between the vines. And that was similar to the valley floor, but 2 feet closer because theirs was 12 by 8. And then I experimented with a whole bunch of different spacings. We went to 11 by 6, 12 by 7. Basically, I was looking at a way for working on the slopes because some of the slopes were steeper. And when you have a steeper slope, it's got to be a little wider so that you can get the tractor and everything through. And then on the less steep, you go a little narrower. We've now changed to if there's a default for spacing in the vineyards, it's 10 by 5 for cordon, a bilateral cordon. And if we're going to use cordon, cane pruning, it's 10 by 6. And then we have where the industry had 2 wires back then. I now have, let's say cordon, and hopefully your guests, your listeners will understand what cordon. That's where there's two permanent arms going in each direction. We would have a fruiting wire that's at 38 inches, and then a foot up from that, we'd have a 6-inch cross arm, and then 24 inches up, we'd have a foot cross arm, and at 36 inches up, we'd have a 2-foot cross arm. So instead of, that's 2, 4, 6, 7 wires, where in the old days we had just 2. And so we've extended the trellis both vertically and horizontally. And when we do it with Cabernet and we do cane pruning, instead of a single wire, we start out with 2 wires that are 14 inches apart. Same at 1 foot, they're at 18 inches. At 2 foot, they're at 30 inches. And at 3 feet, they're at 36 inches cross arms. So it really expands and opens up the vine, allows sunlight to get into the grapes, which is so important. And then the road direction. When I started, we did it all based on contours going across the road, across the slope for soil protection. And we were one of the first people to go to non-till back in the late 70s. And then what we learned is that with non-till, which is like if you had a grass grow in a yard and it would grow all winter and you wouldn't water it and it would eventually die out. And then with the first rains, it pops right back up. So the ground is covered during the summertime, so it cuts down on dust. And if you do get a rain early, then it's there to protect the soil. So the point in this is that we didn't have to worry about soil erosion any longer because we basically got it. I don't want to say whoop, but it's a whole lot better than we ever had. And so now we can lay out our rows for sunlight. And if our rows ran in an east-west direction, and Smith-Madrone is at 38.5 degrees latitude, and if we ran our rows east-west, then the sunlight would fall on the south-facing grapes the entire time. And we learned somewhere in the early 80s that we needed sunlight on the berries themselves. And with the sunlight only on the south side, you got uneven ripening because the south side gets all that sun and they tend to shrivel. And the north side of the same cluster is nice and plump and juicy, so you have uneven ripening, not good. So as I like to say, we're smart little boys and girls. We can figure this one out, so we're going to plant north-south. And then we'd have an even amount of ripening of sunlight in the morning, same in the afternoon. But then this is California, and I would take the morning shift where it's cool and nice, and the vines have had all night to kind of replenish water, and then I'm going to turn it over to you in the afternoon, and you go, well, wait a minute, this isn't fair, because I'm starting my shift in the afternoon when it's hot. So we go, okay, let's go in a northeast southwest direction. And maybe that angle is anywhere from 20 degrees off of true north to maybe 40 degrees off of true north. And the idea is that we would have 55% of the sunlight on the morning side, 55, 60%. And then on the afternoon side, when it's hotter, you would have less sun, maybe in that 45, 40% range. And then but then you have to take into consideration that the hottest part of the day on the mountain is around 3:30, and the sun goes over the top of the vines when it's at about 28 degrees. It goes over the top of the vines at around 1:45. So the hottest part of the day, which is when we want them protected, is at 3:30-ish. But if we lay the rows out for that, it's too much of an east-west basis. So we need a trellis system to protect them in the morning. And the reason for our trellis system that I designed is that it gives it an umbrella shape, or like a tulip that goes up and out and arches over. And so the vines protect the grapes with shade in the late afternoon sun and in the early morning sun. And so that's a huge improvement in wine quality, because we're able to give the winemaker, us, a better grape. So that's just an amazing advancement in viticulture. And then in the winery, we really just do things so much more differently. I would say the biggest thing with red wines is that we're trying, and we understand that different machines, different types of stemmer crushers handle the stems differently. And in the old days, we would get broken, especially with Cabernet Sauvignon, we call them the little stems, the secondary grapes that comes off the main stem of the grape. And a lot of times those will get into the must. And those stems, what we would call jacks or even broken stems, give out a lot of tannin. And so we actually own 3 different stemmer crushers, and we use a different stemmer crusher for red grapes, most of the red grapes, and we use a different one for the white grapes. And by doing that, that's made a major difference in the tannin levels of red wines. And so 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago when we started this thing, a lot of wines in Northern California were extremely tannic. And now we've been able to mitigate that tannin by having very gentle stemmer crushers that remove the berries from the stems to where there's almost zero stems that get into the fermentation, into the must. So those are 2 major things. And then from a practical point of view, when we started, we did everything by hand. And we filled and corked and labeled by hand. And it was a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. And then we had to put these stupid warning labels on, so we ended up with a back label. And we couldn't do back labels by hand. It was just too much. You put the front label on, that's fine. But if you have to then turn it over, try to get the register right. In other words, it's all nice and neat. And then your fingers have got sticky glue all over them. And it's just like, oh man, get me out of this mess. And right at that time, they started doing custom bottling. And now that is I think the singular biggest thing for small wineries is that we don't have to have our own equipment any longer. Yeah. So a truck drives up. It's got $1 million. It's worth $1 million of both the truck and all the equipment inside. And we now bottle somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 95 bottles a minute. The fit and finish and the presentation is so cool. There's no longer dirty fingerprints all over the bottle. We can get the entire production for us done in like 2 days. And in the old days, we would do 300 cases a day of fill and cork and pack off. Then we come back another day and we dump the cases out. We would then foil and label them and pack them off. 300 cases a day would be a lot. We can do 3,000 cases in a day. Almost, not quite, but if everything works right, we could do that. So it's those are phenomenal changes in the industry. Then you have the Napa Valley itself, and as I like to now say, it reminds me of the Italian Renaissance, with all of these new wineries that are designed to the nth degree, and it reminds me of, as I like to say, my Duomo's bigger than your Duomo, and my church painter is more famous than your church painter. And we've kind of lost perspective of what wineries are. They are a room where it's a neat process, but the grapes don't know that they're not in a Corinthian column, spectacular, monument to the ego of the owner. And grapes come in and wine come out the other end. And they don't know if they're in a Butler building or a 20th century building or a 14th century building. They don't care. But a lot of these new owners really do care. And they're coming, they're titans of industry from Silicon Valley. And, this too shall pass.
They've got the money to spare, they feel like they've got to use the money for something, and they want it to look, all I want is that our equipment works and that, the fruit comes in, isn't damaged, and is, processed
right
correctly. That's all I care about,
Exactly. That's all that matters. You got to keep your eyes on the prize, which is the fruit and the winemaking process.
Right.
As long as you have the barrels and refrigeration and reasonably good equipment, that's all you need. Right. Again, my Duomo is bigger than your Duomo. It just doesn't work for me.
So yeah. I've got to go back. So you were saying that you initially did your own bottling and corking and all that. So when Mike and I started making wine for non-commercial, right. our first vintage, we hand bottled everything and hand corked everything, and we used the actual corker, and I died. I literally died, and I'm fit. I lift, I do all that, and I died. And then the labels were a whole other, and we didn't even need the back label because it wasn't commercial, so we didn't have to have all of that, fancy snancy stuff on it or whatever. But I can't imagine, and that was just a small production because it was just for us, basically. I can't imagine doing it commercially that way. I mean, how many people did you have doing 300 cases a day? How many people did you have?
Well, I would be at the corker, and I would pull we had a 14 spout rotary filler it was Italian. And then we had a Girondin corker, and the corker was automatic in that it constantly put a cork. When it was running, it would put a cork into the jaws, and the head would come down and shove it in. And if you left the bottle there when you shouldn't have, it would put a second and or a third cork. And it was a good manager because you would get squirted with wine. And if you didn't have a bottle there, the corks just kept plopping down and on through. So you got into a rhythm of moving it off, and from the spigot of the filler into the, into the corker, and then you would move it off and move it over. And that was fine. I was good with that. I could do that all day long. It was brainless, mind numbing work, but you'd get into a rhythm. It was cool. I hated labeling, just hated labeling, because I didn't want to have it off
center, off.
And I couldn't ever get it. I was always just, and then your fingers get glue on them, and
you're doing this with the label, right? You're shaking your hand.
Right. It's just awful. And then you had little pot Devon labelers, so you would take one label at a time and put it through the labeler, and then you bring it out on the other side, and then you'd have a little wooden jig that you'd lay the bottle down. I'm sure same thing with you, and you get it there, and then you put it down, and then you look at it, and you go and then off it would go, and then you'd have a 5-gallon bucket of water next to you, because the ones that were really bad, you just drop them into the water. And then later, at a break, you take them out, scrape off the label, and then you'd run them through again and hope you did a better job. I hated that part. Now, fortunately, my brother didn't mind labeling. He hated what I did, so it really worked out. It was really a good division of labor.
That's good. That's good.
We're young, and when you're young, you can do all kinds of things.
Yes. So going back into your vineyard. So one of the things when we were at UC Davis and we were studying the soils and all of that for the class, one of the things that really intrigued me was leaf layering. So to help with the protection of the fruit by how many layers of the fruit. So now you're creating this umbrella.
Right.
Are you still concerning yourself with the leaf layers, because you're kind of creating it a different way?
Right. We do go through and pull leaves, if this is what you're going at. I haven't heard the term leaf layering before, but then, old dogs and new tricks. I would say that what our program is we will go early after fruit set, and we'll go through and we'll pull a little bit on the morning side, just a little bit of leaves. And we'll go through and probably leaf 3 or 4 times. And we'll go through and we'll do 2 times on the morning side. And then about that time, we'll go and do a very light leafing on the afternoon side. And then before harvest, within maybe a week of harvest, we'll go through and we'll pull out a lot of leaves. And we do the original leafing to get sunlight in, but not too much. We, dappled sunlight is what we're all looking for. But then before harvest, we go through and we pull a lot more leaves. And what that does is it allows our crew to go through and put their energy into harvesting the grapes, as opposed to pulling the leaves out of everything and having to pull, canes out of the way. And we hope we have a trellis system that facilitates all of that, but still you have to pull leaves, and it just makes it easier. It's hard to pick, but we do everything by hand. And when you're all day long pulling leaves and trying to find the clusters, it's just easier to go through like 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week ahead of time, and get as much of that out of there as you can. We don't strip all the leaves because we could run into a heat spell.
Right.
But especially with Cabernet and with Cabernet Franc, which are late ripening, we can get a rain. And in 2011, there was a really big rain. I think it was October 5th, and the valley got 5 inches of rain. And down in the valley floor, it was a sauna bath. And there was a lot of rotten mold that came up. And we were really lucky because we leafed all of the vineyard that was left to be picked about a week earlier. And so when that rain came, we were in great shape because the sun came out and we had a little bit of wind because we're at 1,900 feet. And so that saved our bacon. We had no rot, no mildew, nothing. Sam brought a bunch of his friends up, and they all thought we had one of the cleanest vineyards in the valley. And we loved the 2011. You know, that was the last of the three really cool years. 09, 10, and 11 were extremely cool. And a lot of people had trouble getting, especially with the 11, getting things right. But it worked for us.
Well, that's what matters, right?
Yeah. And a lot of it is luck. You know, we just happened to, you know, we didn't know the rain was coming, and we just happened to leaf ahead of time in a way that was beneficial for us. Right. And a lot of this has to do with luck too. I mean, you're farmers first and foremost, but you do live by the whims of nature.
Yep. Mother Nature is really the boss.
Yes, she is.
So you guys are located on in Spring Mountain District, and that really came along rather late in terms of being recognized, right? It was like 1993. So you were there quite some time before it actually became recognized. So did you have a gut feeling about it? Did you not care if it was recognized, not recognized? You just, like, what made you choose that location?
Well, well, first of all, Spring Mountain is, while it's not Spring Mountain has historically been one of the earliest sub-appellations in the valley. Now, we didn't have AVAs, American Appalachian issues, until much later. But back in the 19th century, Spring Mountain was known for grapes, as was Diamond Mountain. There wasn't much on Howell Mountain. I don't think there was much on Mount Veeder. There were a certain amount on Mount Veeder, but not very much. And the whole Pritchard Hill where Chapelet is above Hennessy, that didn't exist. Oh. So we always, when I found the property, I was looking for mountain property for two reasons. One, two fundamental reasons, and that is, I think it was Virgil in 43 BC wrote a treatise on farming. And in it, he said, Bacchus loves the hills, Bacchus collis amate. And that's where they recognized that the best grapes came from the mountains. And the second, and I think that is true today. That is the primer number one, if you would. And primer number two is that to make great wine, you have to have great grapes. And think of 4 or 5 day old fish versus fresh fish. And it's the same thing. You can make that older fish not appear as bad as it might be, but you can never make it into something that it was once.
Right.
And the same thing goes with wine. You have to have the best grapes to make the best wine. Now, with not so good grapes, you can use a lot of technology to make them better than they should be, but you can never make them into anything of real promise. And when you have great grapes, you don't have to do much, because, as we all like to say, the wine is made in the vineyard. And it's our job as the growers to not screw that up, and as winemakers to get that into the glass. And then the question is, why is it on, why are the grapes from the mountains, as I claim, better than in the valley floor? Now, I have a lot of really good friends in the valley floor, and we all do a certain amount of good natured kidding. And there are a lot of wines that are made poorly in the mountains, and there are a lot of very good wines in the valley floor. But that being, all things being equal, a vineyard on the mountain is going to struggle, and the berries are going to be smaller, and you will have a much greater skin to juice ratio on a mountain grown grape because it's smaller. Now, a dramatic example would be, think of a golf ball or of a marble compared to a beach ball. And that beach ball has got a huge amount of volume to skin, and the marble has a great deal, or the golf ball or baseball even, has a great deal of skin to the juice. And since all the flavors and color and tannins are in the skin, all things being equal again, you're going to have intrinsically more flavors in the smaller berry than you are in the other berry. Now, I do a couple presentations like this, and I did one at a business school recently, shall go unnamed. And I said to the kids, how many of you kids, there's like 200, there's what, 65 kids there, all top-end business school, obviously future titans of the world. And I said, how many of you people grow tomatoes? One hand went up, over 64 people. And I said, well, kind of ruined that story for me, but here's the story. If you grew tomatoes at home and you watered them every day and you gave them fertilizer once a week, you're going to have a beautiful looking tomato plant, and you're going to have these great big luscious red tomatoes. And when you bite into them, they are going to be watery and bland because they're nothing but water. And had they withheld the water, withheld the fertilizer, the tomato would be smaller, not nearly as pretty, but way more flavorful. And that's the same analogy we're trying to do with mountain vineyards. We don't give in most cases, we dry farm, not 100%, but in most cases. And so the vines just get what Mother Nature gives them. So they have to struggle for nutrients, they have to struggle for water, and they produce smaller berries of intense flavor. And that's why I went to the mountains, to get just that thing. And 48 years later, I wouldn't change it a whit. I still believe then exactly what I believe today.
What's your soil on the mountain?
I'm sorry, what?
What's the? Oh, I'm getting the echo. I don't know what. Just saying, what's the soil on the mountain?
Oh, we're primarily an Aiken stony clay loam. It's a red soil that has rocks all through it. It's a wonderful vineyard soil. It's very well drained. Not high in fertility, but relatively deep. And it has rocks, little rocks, big rocks, and then really big rocks. We replanted a vineyard, a block. We call it Old Cook's Flat. That's just the name of the block. It's an area that's relatively flat. We farmed it for 40 years, and we tore it out because we had phylloxera. And we ripped it, and we brought a big tractor in, and up popped these boulders that were probably 2-3 tons each.
Oh my God!
So big that my little crawler could barely move them. And we've been farming around them for 40 years. Then with Aiken, you get a complexity. You don't just go from one soil type and there's a sheer change into another type. So we complex into both what's called the KID and the forward soils. And so those are all complexing in there together. And it's a dominant soil on the western Mayacamas range. And the underlying geology is really cool in that when I bought the property in 1971, nobody knew really what the geology was because plate tectonics was only just coming into vogue, being accepted. And what they now know is that the Pacific plate subducts underneath the continental plate. And as it does that, it ground off the top of the marine base, the ocean floor, and it ground into the continental plate, where I don't know, and it made this big aggregate, kind of like a concrete aggregate of all kinds of different soils. And this soil, or this base, is called the Franciscan series, and it's 250 million years old. And then laying on top of that are what's called the Sonoma volcanics. And that's where the soil weathered from. And if it was weathered from the lava flow, you have one type of soil, which is what we have. That's where the Aiken stony clay loam and the forward and the KID comes from. And if you have the ash that all collected maybe it flew down into a valley, or maybe it did something. Then you have a different type of soil, and that's a much lighter, whiter soil, and we don't think it's as good for vineyards, and it does erode a little bit more. Doesn't have the rocks in it that our volcanic soil has. But these are all kinds of interesting tidbits of what makes the area unique.
When you were ripped up for phylloxera, well, let's go back to when you first started. How many acres did you plant? Did you just go gung ho and say, all right, we're ripping this stuff up and we're planting, or did you do block by block and grow?
A little bit of both. What you have to understand is that most of the vineyards that we have today were originally planted in the early 1880s by a guy named George Cook, and he homesteaded the property and planted the vineyard and planted a bunch of olive trees. If you go on our website, you'll see a bunch of olive trees, and those were planted by George Cook. That's all we have left of that originated originally with the property. But in the late 19th century, phylloxera came to Napa Valley, and all of the vineyards. We have a 1905 article from the St. Helena Star, and it says that all of the vineyards on Spring Mountain had been abandoned because of phylloxera. And the valley floor had vineyards, but they had been replanted in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1890s. And the valley, and there was, and I can't prove this, but a lot of the old timers have told me that at that time there were more vineyards in the hills than in the valley floor. And much like Europe was in the 19th century, the valley floor was used for crops for eating, vegetables and row crops and things that couldn't be grown on the mountain, that needed more water down in the valley floor. And on the mountains, they could grow wine, and good wine, and olives. And so that's why and they claim, but I can't prove it, that there were more vineyards in the hills back at that time than there were in the valley floor. But then as agriculture changed, prunes went into the valley floor, walnuts went into the valley floor, stone fruit type things. I remember the last pear orchard being yanked out of the valley. And those kinds of crops can't grow in the mountains. They need very good deep soil. They need lots of water, and those things simply aren't available on the mountain. And so that was kind of self-selecting. But when I first walked the property in the fall, early fall of 1970, it was a completely dense forest all over again. And there were Douglas fir trees that were 2.5 feet in diameter and 80 feet tall.
Oh.
So I had to get a logging permit from California Forestry, and it still gives me a chuckle that we had to log the vineyard to reclaim it, and we logged 1 million board feet of timber out of it.
Wow.
And the reason I wanted that property is because I could tell that the trees were young, but grew well. And we were next to our neighbor downslope and to the east of us was Stony Hill, and they were in a good climate location. They had a similar soil that as we had, and so that's what kind of brought it all together.
And when you started planting, did you get the vines from, like UC Dave, from a nursery? So you started really young.
Well, actually, it's even a little bit more esoteric in that I was a grad student at UC Davis in viticulture and enology, and I got the very first heat-treated vines to go into the Napa Valley. And in fact, the vines and our vineyard I was able to get the vineyard certified as an increase block so that we could sell cuttings off of the vines, because they were the first heat-treated vines to come into the Napa Valley. Now, the flip side of it is that they were not on rootstock. They were on their own roots. So I planted 5 acres of Cabernet, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Riesling, and an acre of AXR. AXR number one. And the idea was that I would plant the 20 acres, then I'd have the acre of AXR, and I would make cuttings, and I would make my own bench grafts, and then I would plant out the rest of the vineyard by doing it ourselves. And that's what we did. We built a little greenhouse. We got the machinery, and we made our own bench grafts, and we calloused them up and nurseryed them. And then I got a digger, and we plant them and then dig them up. And where we did that is still what we still call it, the nursery Cabernet, or whatever grapes go in there. It's still considered the nursery, because that's where we grew all our plants to expand out the rest of the vineyard.
That's incredible. That's really incredible. Did you have botany in your background, or was this all what you learned
at Davis?
Wow.
Davis, grad student. My undergraduate degree was in econ at Berkeley, and in a lot of ways it was really valuable. Not, people say, oh, you must be a good business person because you took econ. Econ doesn't have a thing to do with business. As a matter of fact, probably it held me back from that point of view. But what it did give me, and I was a macroeconomist, the big picture. And so it really gave me a great view of the industry. And then when I went to Davis, then I got into the minutiae of making wine and the detail. And so I had this macro point of view, and then I had this kind of intense searching for the word, detail oriented. And I think that was really good. And it also gave me, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how your view is, a way of critically looking at the world. One of my most fun graduate seminars is that we were given research papers, and we were told to basically rip into them. What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What's wrong with this paper? Where is it weak? And so it really teaches you to critically evaluate what you're looking at, and not just read through and go, oh, that's interesting, and they must be right, or what's their methodology? What was their hypothesis? Did they really have a good reason to come up with their results from their research? So that was really fun and interesting.
That really is so for Mike and I have a microbiology degree, and Mike is a food scientist. Mm-hmm. So we're both kind of at that minuscule, that organic level. So when we went to UC Davis, when we took the program at UC Davis, that was an introduction to the big picture of things. So I understand what you're saying. I would like more of the big picture. I would like to, work a full harvest. Like we have people come in and harvest for us, and we source our fruit. So I'm not farming it, although I give you so much credit, because I don't ever want to be a farmer, because I know how much work that is. It's like every day, intense day, everything you do in that. But I would like to have a picture into it, a little, snapshot of what it's like to do that. Because you really are doing it from dirt to bottle, and that is amazing to me.
There's a great deal of pleasure and satisfaction in sitting down and having a glass of wine at the dining room table. And I think it's the most elegant beverage in the world, in the universe. And you get to play in dirt. There's little boys like dirt, and there's a like dirt. And you look at this, and one of the things that I will take to my death is sulfuring on a full moon. And if it's really just the right, perfect, you can turn the lights on, and you're just going down the rows, and you're putting out sulfur dust, and what works great, the sulfur dust just drops. It doesn't go up in the air. It goes down into the vines, and you're just all there at like 3 in the morning, and it's like it just doesn't get any better than that. It's just
one with the earth, one with the earth.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just a little crazy, but I love that stuff, and when it all works, it's just magical.
So you were saying the boys love the dirt. So how much fun did you have taking down the trees?
Well, I drop trees when I have to, but we brought in commercial loggers.
Too many for you?
There are too many, and frankly, working in a forest like that, it's not a place for amateurs. You really got to have the pros come in, and there weren't many, and we actually have protected almost all of the important redwoods on our property. We have some old growth that now is in a conservation easement, and one of the things I had to do when the loggers came in was kind of give them a white lie. Don't you have any canyons around here? No, sir, we don't. Because I knew what they wanted. They wanted the big redwoods. But if you've never seen a redwood felled, it is a thing of beauty. The faller cuts it in just such a way that the tree bounces from one tree to another tree to another tree, and basically just kisses the ground. It comes down so gently. And the reason for that is if you drop a Douglas fir, a redwood like a Douglas fir, you're gonna drop a Douglas fir, hits the ground, and it's like, number 6 on the seismic scale. But if you do that with a redwood tree, you're gonna break it and you've wasted it, because the wood of the redwood will shatter. And we have an area that's completely protected, that has old growth redwoods in it. And some of these redwoods may well be 700 to 1,000 years old. They're just magnificent. Over 200 feet tall. They're just phenomenal. But anyway, I still have to take down trees with the drought. We've lost and bark beetles. We would only take out the trees that we had to, and my brother would angst and I, and we'd look at it. Well, we'll leave it. And then if it died or something like that, then they'd have to come down. So I've gotten pretty good at taking down trees. But I do. I mean, there's a little boy in me still, and I do like dropping the trees. I miss the healthy tree. But this is one of the things that's going on with I call it global chaos, because I think global chaos is a much better description of the environment we're in now, as opposed to global warming or global change. Those are boring terms. Global chaos, that says it all to me. And
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
And one of the problems we're having is that with the droughts, the droughts and the trees, and the other problem we have with our forests, and I think we're going to get this changed a little bit in the future, that the forests, our forests in the north of San Francisco, surrounding San Francisco, were all, mostly, not all, and some of our forests were previously logged, but the areas that we protected had not been logged. But a lot of the forests in that area were logged for the building of San Francisco, and then again for the 1906 earthquake. And what happened at that time, they go and they cut the trees, and then the hardwoods, which would be the black oaks, the madrones, the tan oaks, were released, and so they grew and became dominant. And it took a long time for the Douglas firs to come back in to become the dominant tree. And those trees are now dying, those hardwoods, and now they're clogging up the forest. And there's a huge amount of fuel in the forest, and we just simply have to get the fuel out of the forest. Otherwise, we're going to have more uncontrollable wildfires like we've had in the last 4 or 5 years. And the state government, and I think with the federal government, are going to start funding some of this stuff on in an area. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to work, but we'll find out. We'll see what happens. So I think there's some good things that are happening for California forests that unfortunately took a tremendous tragedies to motivate the government to do something.
Right. And you know, your terms of chaos, I agree 100%. It's not, you know, it's not just warming, it's seasonal changes. You know, like back here on the East Coast, our coldest weather always used to be December into January into like the beginning of February. Then it would start to warm up. You know, now we don't get any snow in December. You know, in December we're still in, you know, light shirts and, you know, I call it hoodie weather, you know, the shorts and the hood, you know, the hoodies, you know. And then now we're getting blizzards in March. And, you know, we never had that. And I think what saddens me the most is, you know, one of the things that is good about New Jersey in terms of, you know, what I like is that we actually do get 4 seasons, you know, that we have those 4 seasons, and that's going away. We now have summer and winter. You know, that spring and that fall section are just, you know, kind of getting smaller and smaller, and then it blows out of the water. So I love the fact that you're calling it chaos, because I think that's a much better terminology for it. It's
Yeah.
sad, but it's true.
Yeah, it is. And back to the forest, and unfortunately, I think, and this is a little political, Jerry Brown did a great job as governor, but he would blame everything on global change, global, you know, warming, when really it was an excuse for negligence on the part of the government. As an example, we almost lost the Oroville Dam a couple of years ago. 200,000 people had to be evacuated. And the reason they had to be evacuated wasn't over global chaos. It was because they had done a rotten job of maintaining that dam, and a bunch of the valves wouldn't open.
Right.
And so now we have, anyway, I'm getting far afield here. We don't want to.
Okay, that's okay. So if I bring it back to your site, when you were doing, you know, falling the trees and doing all that, you actually found underground caves, correct? That were
Well, no, they were not underground. We didn't find them. The property was at one time 550 acres.
Okay.
And and it got subdivided, and the property that we owned was originally 200 acres. They broke off the first 200 acres, and then they subdivided the rest of the 350 acres into 20 and 40 acre parcels. And on one of those other parcels is an old wooden winery. We had the majority of the vineyards, but there were other parcels that had vineyards. And there was this wooden winery that, again, was built in the early 1880s, and they would crush, ferment, and press, and then they would gravity flow down into a cave that I assume was built by the Chinese coolies at the end of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, because there were a lot of Chinese that came into the valley, because there were a number of small caves, and these people were very skilled at doing that kind of stuff. And so about a third of a mile west of our property is a cave that goes in maybe 30 or 40 feet and then turns to the west and runs 100 feet and does get into a really nice sandstone formation where you can still see the pick marks, where it was all done by hand. But going in, they didn't find a good site, and they built stone arches to hold up the ceiling. And again, we think it was the Chinese that were here and were doing that work. But anyway, that was the cave. And unfortunately, it wasn't on our property, which we would dearly love to have had.
Oh.
But the person who owns it is a really good friend, and he did home winemaking in it, so it still has some use. And the thing about the cave, which most people don't understand, and modern caves aren't like this, but a real cave, the water comes down through it, and so caves in the wintertime can be quite wet. And what we also found, because my brother and I started a little bit of wine up there with the owner's wine, and we found, and he was relatively new to the mountain too, and what we found is that the little creepy crawlers loved the ammonium that was in the glue. And so if you weren't careful, the little creepy crawlers would come along and chew off the labels. because they wanted to get to that glue. And so we had more than one bottle of wine where we went, boy, this is really good.
They were the pre-stoners. That's how they. That's how they were getting high.
So, but it and that period of time was a different period. It was a really innovative time. You'd go to a dinner and everybody would sit around and talk wine and drink too much, and the next morning you'd wake up and you go, God, that was a really good idea. And so you go out and try it. And therein lies, I think, a really important difference for your listeners, and that in California, the U.S., if you can think of it, you can do it. And in Europe, if you think about it, you can't do it. They are so restricted by regulations on how to make wine, what grapes to grow where, what the spacing is, how many tons to the acre they can get or kilograms per hectoliter. All of the whole concept of innovation has been lost. And when I was at UC Davis, I first went there. As a matter of fact, I went there as a senior at Berkeley. I became what was called an intercampus exchange student, and I took the class, liked it, and decided I wanted to go into the wine field. So as a senior, I was taking Chem A, B, C, and then I had to do a lot of makeup my first year as a grad student. As you know, in your fields of inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, bacteriology, bio, all this other stuff, plant physiology, plant pathology. So I went from a really soft science to a really deep science. And when I was in Chem 1A, BC, both at Berkeley and at UC Davis, I'm in there with a whole bunch of pre-med weenies. They don't care about anything but getting into med school. I mean, they have blinders on. So it was highly competitive for a non kind of chemistry person as a senior getting into it. But anyhow, I enjoyed my stay at UC a lot.
That's awesome. I'm actually an echo. I don't know what's going on. So you're best known, I guess, for your Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Riesling, right? But I read somewhere, or I heard somewhere, that you said that one of your best wines was a Pinot Noir and one of your worst wines was a Pinot Noir.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I picked those 4 varietals because, being a good, arrogant American boy, I thought we could do them all great. And I thought then, and I still believe, that those are the 4 most important varietals in the world. Pinot Noir, I used to say, I hoped wasn't an exact parallel, but it seemed like trying to make a great Pinot Noir was akin to going out looking for the Holy Grail. And when my brother and I sat down and said, okay, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? How are we going to make it? How are we going to grow it? We came up with this crazy idea that we had to be very cavalier about it. We had to have an attitude of not caring, because if we cared, we wouldn't experiment and be wild and crazy and do stuff that you normally wouldn't try. Because there was no one in the New World, California, that we could look to's Pinot Noir and say, aha, they got it right. Let's do what they're doing. And so we tried a lot of things. One of the things we did, and I think this is fairly accurate, we were the first ones to do wild fermentations. We first started screwing around with Pinot Noir, not on a commercial basis, but bootlegged. We were doing Pinot Noir with 74, 5, and 6 before we actually got the winery going in 77. But so we do a wild fermentation, and I called it a bronco fermentation because it was wild fermentation, and we're in the West, so what the heck? And what I discovered was, the first time, it took 3.5 days to get going, and it was Clecera. And if you know Clecera, it's a true wild yeast, and it kicks off ethyl acetate, which is, for your listeners, nail polish remover. So when the Pinot Noir started fermenting, it's like, oh my God, we screwed the pooch here. This sucks. But I went back to my textbooks and I'm going, oh, wait a minute, this is okay. It's Clecra. It dies out at 1.5% alcohol, and it'll blow off. And then a Saccharomyces cerevisiae, a true wine yeast from somewhere, will come in and take over. So we did that through, and so we did wild fermentation through the mid 1980s. Our 1980 Pinot Noir was as good a Pinot Noir as we've ever tasted from California. But bracketed, the 79 and the 81 were just really not very good. And we were dirt poor, and we just couldn't afford the luxury of going after Pinot Noir. And it became pretty clear that Riesling and Pinot Noir were not as popular as Chardonnay and Cabernet. And so we were doing a good job with Riesling, and we weren't happy with Pinot Noir. And so we grafted it over in '86, and frankly, never really looked back.
Well, that brings up the Riesling. I am an acid head. I love acid wines, and I got a bottle of your Riesling, and I had heard that you love acid and all this stuff, and I tasted it. I have to tell you, it is one of my favorite wines I have ever had. I mean, I was sad when the bottle was empty. It was like I just kept going, oh my God, this is fantastic. So like chicken or egg question. All right. So did you specifically look for the acid? Was that your intent, or did you like, wow, this has acid, so we're going to go with it type thing?
It's a little bit of both. We didn't really know what we were getting into because we'd never grown grapes in this location early on. And really the first commercial vintage for us was the 77 Riesling. And we harvested it about 22. And we knew that we were not in a similar climate to Germany or Alsace, that we were California. We knew that balance was the primary issue that we had to be concerned with, balance between sugar and acid. And they were more northern latitudes. They took longer to ripe. They picked at lower sugars, and we weren't going to, so we came up with what we thought we wanted, which was to harvest around 22 degrees Brix, which for your listeners is a measurement of soluble solids, but fundamentally think of it as 22% sugar, and you're close enough. And then we wanted to stop the fermentation. We thought we wanted the sugar, residual sugar, at about 1.7. So that's what we did. And instead of taking the wine, fermenting it to dryness, and then adding grape sugar or moutet, which is basically grape juice that has been stopped that prevented me fermenting as a source of sugar, we didn't think that was the right way to do it. You get too much alcohol. So what we did right from the get-go is to ferment down to about that 1.7 range, and then turn the chillers on and anesthetize the little yeasties in there, and they'd quit working. And they'd settle down, and we could clarify and move forward. And so that worked for us really well. But over the time, we have dried the wine out. So we went from 1.7 to 1.4, 1.3, and now we're below 1 on a regular basis. The lowest we've ever gotten is 0.3, 0.3, 0.35, somewhere in there. That was a little too acidic, even for us. And now we float around in a range that we're pretty happy with, which is like 0.6 to 0.7, 0.75, somewhere below 1%. 0.9 is too high. And so we still want to harvest at low sugars, so that we can get good acidity. But to be, completely, upfront, if it's a hot year, we don't, we will acidulate.
Right.
We're not afraid of that. We think that is completely acceptable. As I used to say when I taught viticulture and enology, the Europeans would make it illegal to add acid to their wines because they didn't need to. It's a cooler growing area. But sometimes their grapes, actually more often than they're willing to admit, wouldn't get ripe. So they had to chapelize, a cute word for adding sugar. Now in California, we never have problems getting things ripe. So we have made it illegal to add sugar. A very hypocritical, self-serving issue on both areas. And occasionally, if the wine is deficient in acid, we will acidulate. We try not to. We would like it not to have to do that. And if we do it, we have to do it really early on in the process. You can't wait for 6 months or a year and then acidulate before you bottle. You have to make the decision really right at fermentation, because then the acid blends in and marries in with the grapes in a way that it doesn't happen. And in the same chemistry issue, there are lots of boys and girls who harvest, let's pick on Cabernet Sauvignon, as I like to say. You would think after 8,000 years of making wine, we'd know when to pick the damn grapes. But there's nothing more controversial in Napa Valley and Sonoma County, and in really now the wine world, as to when do you decide the grapes are ready to be picked? Well, we still are a little old-fashioned and hedge on the older way of doing things. And back to bricks, it used to be when I got out of UC Davis and came to the Valley, if you brought in grapes over 24 degrees bricks, you were penalized, or the grapes were just rejected outright. Now it's gotten to where some of these wines aren't harvested until they're 28, 29. They're practically all raisins. I hate the wines, but as long as two of the major reviewers love them, they'll still be made. And yet they have no acidity. They're boring as all get out. And once you hone in on the prune raisiny character, they're deathly boring. And because they've been sitting out there for so long, they come in with a fairly high level of acetobacter, acetic acid, vinegar. And the wines don't hold up because you have to, the word is ameliorate, with water to bring the sugar down from, let's say, 30 degrees bricks down to where it'll ferment to dryness at around 25 or 25 and a half, 26 degrees bricks. And you've added all that water, you've mucked up the chemistry. And at that point, you're talking 15% water addition, and there's no amount of acid that you can add. And a lot of these people don't even want to add acid. So the wines come out flat and boring and dull-eyed and just yuck. Gee, sorry I jumped on that one, didn't I?
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So with your Riesling, with the acidity level that's in there, this is ageable. I mean, this is an ageable Riesling. So what is your, like, what have you seen, of a typical, because it varies, like you were saying, you changed the, all that, the sweetness level has dropped and all that. What do you see as your average, your recommendation for ageability for your Riesling? Because most people don't think of that with a Riesling.
And not every year, and I have to be very, very clear here, not every year of our wines are going to age the way I would like them to. But I would say a majority of our wines, when they're stored properly, will age 15 to 25 years.
Okay.
And I also believe very strongly that the wines pay back dividends for your patience in storing the wine. Chardonnay, no. Our Chardonnay will be drinkable at 15 years, but why bother? Because it doesn't pay back dividends. It doesn't improve. Riesling improves in a way that no other varietal that I know of does. And at a 20-year-old Riesling, a good one, it's every bit as good, if not better, than an equally aged red wine. The wine is just so elegant and so aromatic and so unctuous and delicious. It's truly a thing of beauty. And I don't think there's another varietal that ages as well as Riesling. Now, there's a lot of Rieslings that don't age because of the way they're made. They're made in a kind of a supermarket style wine. But those of us who make good Rieslings and German Rieslings and Alsatian Rieslings and I'm promoting wines from other regions, you know, the Finger Lakes is doing a really good job. There were some guys, I worry about them, that were growing Riesling on the Michigan Peninsula. And I think this was going to be another really, they've had a series of really cold years on them. This polar vortex, I don't know how they're going to fare with this one, because I suspect the Michigan Lake froze around them, and then it'd get too cold for them. But anyway, they were doing a pretty good job. I think it's a mesmerizing grape varietal when made right. It goes with everything really, really well, with the exception of, you know, red meat. Red wine will always outperform anything. A red wine will outperform anything with red meat. But on all the white meats and all of the sea fish or fresh fish, just about any other food, the Riesling just does marvelously well. And if you have to have a glass of wine, or you need a glass of wine in the morning, there's nothing better than Riesling.
All right, I'll keep that in mind. So back to the aging. So some varietals have a tendency to, you know, you can drink them young and you can drink them old, you know, after they've aged, but they go into like a little funk, some kind of in the middle, like a, you know, a bell curve kind of thing. Is Riesling one of those varietals, or do you think it just continuously?
No, I would say that there are certain vintages that just have a straight curve going up. But most wines do have I would call it more of a sine wave, where they do go into a dumb phase for a little bit sometimes, and then they come out of it. But it's like, you know, it's like people. Some vintages are a little different than others, and just like people are a little different. But I don't see the negative on the Riesling as they do with sometimes with Chardonnay. And aging of wine is still kind of an art in understanding it. We have wines that go back to our very first vintage, and it's kind of interesting, as I like to say, we always end up with more of the not so good vintages and not near enough of the really good vintages. Well, the problem is we drink the good vintages too damn much, and we don't drink the other vintages nearly as quickly. But wines are also kind of like people, and kids. You know, you can have the brilliant young child that just is on a, you know, a vertical trajectory, and it's just a straight curve going up. And there's other kids that go you know, down for a little bit, and then find, you know, bloom late in life.
Late bloomers.
And then there are others where you're going, oh, you know, this is going to be the next, you know, whatever, and it's like, oh, something happened in midlife. So wine's a little bit like that. And then on top of that, you've got a cork, which is organic. It's a natural organic product, and there's things that go on with corks that sometimes we wish didn't go on with corks, and that's frustrating. But you know, let me also say, older Gewürztraminers, dry older Gewürztraminers are fabulous. They don't age as well as Riesling, but a 10 or 15-year-old Gewürztraminer is really also quite lovely. If I could grow another varietal, a white varietal, I'd like to do some Gewürztraminer. But I'm too old, and the market for Gewürztraminer is like, man, I got enough windmills to tilt against.
So I'm going to probably fire you up right now a little bit, because I know this is, there you go. Yeah, be prepared. I know this is kind of like in your heart, soul, everything. But there's a lot going on with Measure C right now, and you seem to be right smack dab in the middle of what's going on, and so I think people outside of your area, Measure C, I think, is a confusing concept for people. So can you first explain exactly what's on the docket, like in terms of what Measure C is?
Probably not, but I'll do my best, because anyway, what Measure C was a group of people who got together and did an initiative. And on the East Coast, you don't know what initiatives are. Half the country has initiatives, half of them don't. And the half that don't are on the East Coast, and the half that do are in the West Coast, Western United States. And that is where the people can go get together. And fundamentally, it is a good concept in one way. And that is, if government doesn't behave properly, the people can go out and petition with an initiative to get signatures. And I think it's 10%. You have to get 10% of 10% of the people have to sign your petition to change whatever it is that they want to change of the last election. So these people decided to do initiative, but in California, we perverted the process. And so if you do an initiative, then you get to get the title and the name, and then it's a way of going around the public forum. And so when you have, and if you go through the public forum to change rules, regulations, ordinances, laws, statutes, there's a debate, a public debate that goes on. The public gets their input, the legislatures debate it, the horrid people from the outside that they get paid to the lobbyists, there was the word I was looking for, get in there and be able to present what they think are the good things or the bad things about it. So it's a collaborative effort where something that comes out of it is not nearly as I would say, my point of view, not nearly as damaging, but is more suited to correcting the issue that they're trying to make the rule, ordinance, law, statute for. In the initiative, it's a take it or leave it. This case, it was created in secret. No one on the other side got any input. They put it together, and they were. And the bottom line is, it was called the Oak Woodlands and Watershed Initiative, and it was to protect the oak woodlands and to protect the watershed so that they could have more water and cleaner water. That's the argument. Well, who in their right mind is against oak trees or clean water or more water? So, I mean, that's like motherhood and apple pie. You can't get a more sympathetic concept. But as everything else, it's the devil's in the details. And really, what is or was their goal? And we believe that their goal was to stymie the wine industry. It was a red herring that they were doing. And what would happen if it passed is that a third of the county is in oak woodlands, and no more vineyards would be able to be planted. And we didn't think that was right. And I became very involved, and it lost very closely, but it lost. And I think that was a tremendous win for us because we had a huge rock to roll up the hill just for parity. And it was a pretty hard-fought campaign, and the Measure C folks left nothing on the table. But they didn't do anything with science. They didn't do anything with fact-based presentations. And the way we were able to do it was to use facts and science. And as an example, the thing with the forest, once this passed, you could do very little with the forest. And eventually those oak woodlands would become clogged up. And then you would have the same issue that our western forests have. And there would be insects, and with drought, the trees would become susceptible to insects and disease. And on top of that, the forest, before the Europeans got here, the Indians would burn off the forest on a regular basis, the low underbrush. But when you don't do that, then the forest starts becoming dense and it actually uses more water. So what they were trying to do was to, to get more water released into the rivers and creeks, was just the opposite of what was going to happen. Now, it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take 10, 15 years, 20 years, but eventually those forests would become clogged and be very difficult to get in and to manage them. So they lost, and now the Board of Supervisors is running scared. And we just had a meeting a week ago today, actually, a week ago today, in front of the Board of Supervisors, and all of the industry was there, and we all talked about science. We will live and die on science. But if you're going to regulate our industry with more regulation, which makes us more non-competitive in the marketplace, you have to. We demand that you identify the problem, and that there is no other solution than a regulation, and we want to know what the solution is that you're proposing based on science. And we don't think that's an unreasonable requirement, since agriculture is considered the highest and best use of Napa County. And we think we're going to probably lose this one. And it's an appeasement. It's a policy of appeasement, and these people are not going to be appeased. And quite frankly, they hate the wine industry. And they don't understand that there is, I mean, that they see it, but they don't really internalize it, that the only thing that keeps Napa Valley in agriculture is a healthy, economically viable industry. And we're within 70 miles of San Francisco. We are one of the only areas that is truly an agricultural-based community. And if they continue to hammer us on a false narrative, then we're going to lose any competitive advantage, and that will weaken the ability to sustain Napa Valley as an agricultural entity. And we have the strongest WD, winery definition ordinance, in the country. We have the strongest hillside ordinance in the country. No one does farming better than we do. And no matter how well we do, it's not enough for these people. And that's really frustrating. And we're all willing to go out and compete in the world market of wine, which is, as you probably know, is getting to be more and more competitive. America is now the largest single wine consuming nation in the world, not on a per capita basis, but on a volume basis. And every country in the world that grows wine wants a piece of America. And so when I started in the wine business, there were 30 wineries, maybe 30 in Napa Valley. There's now 475. There's another 500, what we would call zip code or virtual reality. There are wineries in every state. There's now apparently 10,000 wineries in the country. We have to compete against everybody else in the country. We have to compete against Europe, Eastern Europe, South Africa, South America, Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia. Israel is now coming in with their wines. China is coming in with their wines. It is a tremendously competitive world out there, and we have a very high cost of operation here. We have more regulations than anybody else. We're more hamstrung. We have to, if our permits tell us how many visitors we can have a day. They tell us how many employees we have in a day. No one else is doing that to their wineries. And so I see it as a possible threshold. And if the Board of Supervisors caves to these critics, it will be a signal that they don't really care about the ag industry like they've been talking about. So it's and I fought that, and I fought this all my adult life. When I went over, I was able to close on the property in the springtime. I got an early summer permit. I think it was right around June. I got a permit from CDF, California Department of Forestry, to be able to reclaim my vineyard. I had to log it. It had commercial timber on it. And I went over and got the permit, and I had to have an RPF, Registered Professional Forester. We had to do a certain amount of studies, not near the studies that we have to do today, but we had to do studies, and there were standards, and we had to have someone who oversaw it all. And when I got the permit, the forester looks at me and he says, "Kid, I know you think you know what you're doing, but you don't." He said, "When you fire up the first chainsaw, when your crew gets in there and they fire up that chainsaw, the crazies are going to come out of the woodwork and they're going to go after you hook, line, and sinker." And I said, "No, sir. I'm a newly minted UC Davis weenie. I'm doing a good thing for the valley. I'm doing a good thing for the forest." And he goes, "Well, good luck, kid." And he was right and I was wrong. Anybody who's ever been to Smith-Madrone would know there's no way on God's green earth that we could ever build a hotel up there. But I got accused of that more times than I care to remember. It doesn't matter what the science is or what the narrative is. They're just opposed to change. And these people are very vocal. We are doing a better and better job than ever before in our environmental sensitivity as far as farming and wineries. We're leading the nation in all of that, but it's never good enough. And it's frustrating. And small wineries like Smith-Madrone, it's going to get to the point where you just say, screw it, we've had it. We'll sell off to some uber wealthy person and let these idiots deal with that. Or once the industry starts caving, it's almost impossible to turn it around. And we have a lot of competition, not only from other wineries, but other products, from beer. Cannabis is now out there. I don't know what's going to happen with cannabis, but there's a lot of competition, and you can't be constantly looking over your shoulder to see if your neighbor is going to stick you in the back with a shiv, because of they don't like what you're doing. And as I like to say, they want the fruits of our labor, which is a beautiful valley, but they don't want to see us do the work, which is selling directly to people. And distribution for small wineries has become harder and harder and harder. And a lot of wineries simply cannot live without direct to consumer sales. And they want to take that away. And if they do that, there will be winery after winery that will go under, because they don't have, because first of all, there aren't enough good distributors out there. And they don't need a bunch of wineries that, that don't have any other distribution. It's really hard. I hope your listeners can understand some of this. Sometimes I'm a little too inside the baseball program to make it real clear. But the bottom line is that being in the alcohol beverage business, we are limited in how we sell our product. If we were making ball bearings and you wanted to buy our bearings, if you were a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 90-year-old, you wanted to buy ball bearings, we could sell direct to you. We could sell through distributors. It doesn't make any difference. And we would have
any state.
Any state. and we are limited, and we are, and it's becoming more and more difficult now to sell direct than ever before. And to give you an idea, the Supreme Court just ruled that we now have to collect use tax, sales tax. So we now have to buy a program, which is very expensive, that when we make a sale, we know exactly what the sales tax is for every town and community in America. We have to collect that tax, so that's one program. Then we have to have another program that the two programs will talk together, so that every month, whether we sell wine or not in a state, we have to file with the state. So that program tells us how much money we owe to the state, what county is owed what money, because the county wants the money or the city wants the money that had the unique sales tax with it. And then we have to learn how to make this process work. And there goes another employee. And for a lot of us little wineries, we do, we're not the pharmaceutical industry throwing off great huge chunks of money. We're first and foremost farmers. Second of all, we are winemakers, and third, we are marketers and public relations people. And most of us are not exactly the best marketers in the world. And a little winery like Smith-Madrone, which is 3,000 to 5,000 cases, we sell everything we make, but we have to sell it. We sell in 2 provinces in Canada. We sell in Japan. We sell in the UK, Czechoslovakia, Germany. We're always looking for a new market because we can never rely on where we have been selling it, because it changes so much. Yeah. And when I used to teach this over at Santa Rosa Junior College back in the early 70s and 80s, I said, look, if you want to get rich, go buy a couple McDonald's franchises, and you can retire to the Bahamas in 10 or 12 years. But in the wine business, we have people who have been in business for 25 years, and they're feeding the winery. And we have to compete against those people. And when an industry isn't driven by profit, it mucks up the economics of it. So that's why I was making fun of the wineries that are kind of Italian Renaissance like. But my answer today is we don't do Corinthian columns. No Corinthian columns. We put our foot at Corinthian columns. You want to do Corinthian columns? Go for it. We ain't doing it. And so it's we all love the business, but when you come back and you think your neighbors who you're providing, I mean, look, Napa Valley is a spectacular, beautiful place to live. And these people are so unappreciative of what they have here and what we provide them. And it's very frustrating. And in a lot of ways, they are going after the unintended consequences, because they really are after the Mr. and Mrs. Gotrocks who sold their widget company for $1 bazillion out of Silicon Valley, and they come up here. But what they don't understand is that you can't single out with regulations one group of people, and you don't get to pick favorites. Regulations have to be applied to everyone. Right. And so what they're doing is they're in America, but it's not the Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie companies that are going to be affected by this, because they can handle it. It's the family run wineries that are getting stamped on or stomped on, so that, like you said, they're going after these conglomerates and completely forgetting about really who's all of the little guys who are setting up this whole thing. Yeah, absolutely. And for whatever reason, I have made it my mission in life to be a pushback, and so I single-handedly am pushing back. And a lot of people think that what I did in defeating measures, well, one of the big things of defeating Measure C was my effort. I had my own blog and website and provided facts and figures, and people could go to it and read independent articles about what the environment is like. Now, it doesn't mean that Napa Valley is perfect. We still have a ways to go. But Napa Valley got to where it was over 150 years of poor environmental practices, and you can't change that overnight. But we're doing a damn good job of it. So anyhow, that's my 2 cents on it.
I think that when Measure C failed, right? I think it was like 51 to 49%. So it really was a narrow margin. But I think that what was happening was people were voting or preparing to vote without really knowing what they were voting for. Because as you were saying, who doesn't love the oak trees? Who doesn't want clean water? But that was what was being presented. Right. And the people with the money, the lobbyists, that's what they wanted. They were trying to sly in what they, hide really what they were trying to do behind this. Ooh, let's all be happy and merry and dance through the forest, and all of that stuff. And it's what bothers me is that they try to hide things like that. And then even when people like you go and fight and they get the people fight and you win, now they still can continue to change things. They tweak it to modify it, just try to attack it from a different way. They're like, okay, well, I couldn't get it from this avenue, so now, all right, forget that. I'm going to come at it this avenue.
Right.
And I think they play with a lot of smoke and mirrors, and it's infuriating because they're not thinking of really what's better. They're thinking what's better for them is what they're doing.
And the other thing for me that really propelled me into this one is that I really took exception to it because it really was a tyranny of the majority. And what they wanted to do, the people that owned the oak woodlands were not asked to be at the table to discuss this. They were not asked to give up their land. What would have happened is that had this passed, they would have taken their property rights from them with nothing in return.
Yep.
And to me, this is the ugly side of the initiative process, which is pure democracy. And it was a classic case of tyranny of the majority. And they came out and said, we want their land because we want their water. And Warren Winarski and Andy Beckstoffer and that group were absolutely blatant about it and saying, we want to take their land from them. We don't want to pay for it. We want the water. We need the water for our vineyards in the valley floor, and therefore we are entitled to regulate them out of their property rights. And I just had a shit fit over this. And it's not very often that you get into an issue which is really at the very fundamental nature of what democracy or a representative form of democracy should be. And that's what really drove me, is because you don't very often get to vote on something that I think as is important as what Measure C was purporting to be. Now, to be honest with you, even those who were supportive of the no on Measure C side didn't get the implication of this importance. But it's what drove me, because they didn't go to the Board of Supervisors and ask for a forum. They knew they couldn't win in the public arena of ideas. But in California, a lot of initiatives are now being used as a way of getting around government, because you can appeal to the emotionalism of the argument. And again, they're ugly campaigns, because it's a win or lose. You don't get to be subtle here. You know, both sides claim the other side acted dirty, and it was like, dude, you started it. This is the way initiatives go. They're brutal, they're ugly, and everyone's going to have hurt feelings, and friendships are broken apart, and that's the nature of an initiative.
Right. Right. Well, we are at hour and 41 minutes, and time with you seriously flies. Like, I can't believe it's been that long.
As it did. Oh my.
But I'm gonna ask you one more question, because one of our taglines is pursue your passion, and you are obviously a passionate individual. And what I always ask somebody is, if somebody is entertaining the idea of entering the wine industry, what would be your one thing to tell them about pursuing their passion?
Oh boy. One thing. Well, first of all, it depends on whether you want to go into the winery side of things. I would say this, and that is, no matter what the industry is like, whether it's in good times or bad times, or in the bottom, or saturated, or growing like crazy, there is always room for a new idea, a new way of doing things. On the other hand, so that's kind of the overarching 30,000-foot view from the airplane. But if you're really interested in doing this, try to get some education and a job, and somehow work out in a way that you come out here. And there are internships. There are websites where you can intern. You can get books in your community. If it's a reasonably large community, there will be a group of people who are working on their SOM certification. There will be like-minded people. Find them, get together, try to taste wines blind, read, and just, if you're really dedicated, go for it. A lot of people do it and make it. The way I did it doesn't exist any longer. I just came from a simple middle-class family, and was able to do things that simply can't be done today. I happened to be at the right place at the right time in history, and that door closed. And the idea, but there are a lot of people who do private labels. In other words, who do a custom crush. People get into the wine business. I have a young friend who wants to get into business. He's done harvests, 2 or 3 harvests. The people go to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa for doing internships there. And if you're really driven, then just go for it.
Get down and dirty.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, passion is passion. Doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but if you don't try, you're never going to know. And I think not trying is worse than failing. Failing is honorable. You gave it a try. That's good. I don't know how you live. But yeah, anyhow.
All right. So at the end of every Dracaena Wines on Wine, I like to play a little game. It's basically, it's a little bit of a psychology game, but it really came from Friends, from Phoebe on Friends. But basically, I just want to ask you, it's opposites, and there is no right or wrong answer. It's just what resonates with you more. And it's just kind of something that I think is fun to see how people think. So if it's all right with you, I'll do that.
Sure.
All right. So I'll start off with non-wine stuff, and then we'll get on into the wine stuff. All right. All right. So they're going to be opposites, just whichever one resonates more. So night or day?
Oh, day. I mean, so no, the one I like more, or the opposite of what I want?
No, what you like more. What you like more?
Night or day? Which one do I like? Day.
Yeah, day. Okay. Sunset or sunrise?
Oh, sunrise.
Black or white?
Oh, equal.
Walk or run?
I walk now. Hike.
Food or drink?
Drink.
Old world or new world?
New.
Sweet or dry?
Dry.
Bubbles or still?
Bubbles.
Oak or stainless?
Oak.
Drink now or drink later?
Both.
Blend or varietal?
Both.
Vintage or non-vintage?
Ah, vintage.
Cork or screw cap?
Cork.
Napa or Sonoma?
Napa. Although I have a lot of good friends in Sonoma. By the way, I think the screw cap, just real quick, screw cap's a great idea, just not for higher priced wines. I don't know, pick a number, $15, $20. Screw cap's great. Just the consumer who is buying expensive wines don't want to do a screw cap yet. They may.
Right. It's a timing thing. It's a timing thing.
Yeah.
And as a sidebar, I had read a research article about just people in a blind tasting, the people who were the researchers in a dark room outside, they fake popped a cork and poured the wine, and then fake screw cap, opened the screw cap so there wasn't that pop, and poured the same exact wine. And it was statistically analyzed that people liked the wine better with the cork, and it was the same exact wine. So Americans, at least, are not quite ready for that. Yeah.
I would say, again, for your listeners, viewers, whatever, that is that they should taste with their mouths, not their eyes.
Yep.
Don't and trust their own palate. Don't let us tell them what they should or should not like. If you like $2 Chuck, God bless you. You know, you like it. And if you don't like a $300 bottle of wine, tough shit.
Yep, I agree. Drink what you like.
Right.
Drink what you like.
Yeah.
All right. So we went with Napa, obviously. Commercial or indigenous?
Oh, neither. I used captured wild yeast.
Oh, you're making your own kind of semi-commercial. You're taking indigenous, you're taking native, but you know what you're using.
I'm ridiculing the concept of wild yeast, and that is that there is no such thing really as wild yeast. What we're learning is that after the first year or two, the winery is infected isn't the right word. It is a
home for
a dominant yeast strain. And so even if you start out with a wild yeast concept, whatever the dominant strain of yeast is in the winery will take over. And the only place that you will ever have a true wild yeast fermentation is one time only, and I got corrected on this by someone, and that is, I would say that if you want to go to an area that's never had grapes grown and you plant a vineyard, the first year that you bring the grapes in, that will be a wild fermentation. But from there on out, the winery will have wine yeast in it, and the pumice that goes back into the vineyard will put wine yeast back into the vineyard. And then the guy who I was talking with said, "Ha! But you forgot the yeast that you're bringing on with you when you come from Napa Valley to visit that place." And I went, "Okay, you got a point." So what I like to say, again, somewhat tongue in cheek, but not entirely, and that is that what is champagne yeast, or champagne or what do I say, Montrachet? Those are just yeasts that have been captured in that area and have been been processed down into a pure strain. They are in fact a wild yeast. They've been captured, but that's all they are. And I defy anybody to show me a fermentation and that can produce a discernible difference in the wine. And in fact, it brings up a larger process issue that the yeast that we're using is too efficient. When I got out of UC Davis, we were generally taught that the efficiency of yeast from sugar to alcohol was about 0.55.
Right.
Now we're at 0.61.
Mm-hmm.
And we should be demanding of our wild yeast capturers, hunters, to come up with a strain which is less efficient, that would bring us back to 0.55 conversion or 0.5 conversion. Because frankly, it's not the alcohol that makes the wine what it is. It's all the other stuff, and the higher alcohol can be negative. You know, alcohol's in the 14.5. Well, 14.5 is outright, mild. I mean, we're talking alcohols that are in the 16%, 16.5, 17%. That's just not good. And so we really need yeast that will produce a wine that is in a more moderate alcohol level. But you understand where I'm coming from. I've had it with this whole wild yeast stuff. It is, as far as I'm concerned, complete hooey. There was some really good research out of the Okanagan about 4 years ago who did some of this work, and they discovered no matter what yeast you inoculated the must with, the dominant strain in that winery, it must be a tremendous struggle that goes on. I mean, kind of like a war of the yeast. And the dominant strain just takes over and does the major part of the fermentation, or at the very least, the finishing of the fermentation. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot still to be. Pardon me?
I mean, I'm a microbiologist, and I know how it all works. I know how it's in the winery. I know all of that stuff, and I never even, I never thought about that. But you're right. Unless it's the very first, unless it's the virginal crop, the virginal crop, it's been over and over.
Yeah. And so then you get into the whole thing. And then with us, and so we were back to Pinot Noir, I didn't even know, nobody even knew what to call it. We would call it a 3.5 day cold soak today, because that's how long it takes Clecra to get going. Well, who knew that we were doing that? And not that it mattered, because frankly, we gave up. But there's a lot of things, and what's driving a lot of this is marketing. People need to differentiate themselves somehow. And you go on a website or into a retail store, and they've got all the natural wines over here and the biodynamics over here and the natural yeast wines over here. It's like, dude, it's the wine. It's the wine. How good is the wine? But maybe I'm old-fashioned that way.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's a brilliant viewpoint, and it's exactly true. And like I said, I know all that stuff and didn't really think about it that way. So that's awesome.
Well, that's. I mean, I live and breathe this stuff, and I taught it. And when you do that, your brain just starts thinking in a different way, and that gets into what I said earlier about critical thinking. And you start looking at it, and it gets me in trouble because I bring up stuff that other people go, where did that come from? And then if you're open to new ideas, like the guy said to me, look, you bring in with your clothes, you contaminate that area. But anyway, that's really winging it out there.
That's awesome, though. I love it. Yeah. So if people are looking to get in touch with Smith-Madrone, it is smithmadrone.com, correct? Is your website?
Smith-Madrone.com. You betcha.
And they place their orders there?
Yep, they can do that. They can, do the old-fashioned way and call us on the phone. But yeah, and we
Who does that anymore, right?
we look. One of the things about the wine business, it's a people business. Yes. If you don't like people, you shouldn't be in it.
Yep, you are correct. One of my favorite things to do is to be behind the table pouring
yes.
for people to talk to them, tell them our story, to see their face when they taste our wine. It's
Yeah.
that's what it's about. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And then you are also on social media at Smith-Madrone, Instagram.
Yes, we're all of those things. The easiest thing to do is just go on the website, and we keep the website up to date, and everything that we ever have written, talked about, is somewhere on the website. All of the tasting notes to go way back are there. You know, anyhow, love to have people buy our wine. It's what keeps us in business.
That is true. That is true. It's always a good feeling when you get that order and people are talking about your wine.
That's right.
But I want to thank you very much for taking the time out tonight to talk to me. I know our timing was horrible. We've tried for quite some time to get together, so I am thrilled that we were finally able to find a time that we both were free. And in all honesty, really, I really do consider you a maverick of the wine industry, and I do look at you as somebody who I'm like, that's what I would like to be like, the way you think, the way you produce amazing wines, and obviously all that passion, and I love it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that too. It's fun. That we should do it again. This has been fun.
Yeah, maybe next time, maybe in the summer, I can take a drive up, and we'll do it from the winery, and I can show people the winery itself.
That would be great. I'd love it. That
Yeah.
would be good. Yeah. Okay.
All right, I'm gonna stop the video right now.